What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we're doing another episode of System Crafters Live, where we basically just set up a live stream and talk about a few interesting topics and maybe do some live coding on Emacslisp configuration stuff. So yeah, basically we're getting this set up a little bit late this morning because I had to prepare for an impending snow situation here in the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest is notoriously bad at dealing with snow. So those of you who live in places where snow is pretty common, you're probably going to laugh at me, but I had to go like buy food and make sure that I had the necessary stuff to make sure that me and my family don't freeze and starve to death over the weekend. So that was a lot of fun. But we're here now. So yeah, let's just get things going. First of all, I'd like to say hi to the people who are here in the chat. If you're here this morning, please say hello. Hello, Diego, Valentine, Bo, Fresh God XD. Victor. Oh, Bo says it's 1:21 a.m. where they are. That's pretty late. Yeah, Tony, Stefan, Andreas. Well, how's it going, everybody? Let me get my screen pulled up here. I think I have things backwards than I normally do in the setup. Let me see here. All right, cool. What's up, everybody? Jeff says they'd suck at dealing with snow in the Midwest and Oklahoma. Well, I'm kind of surprised about that because it seems like it's more common there than it is here. All right. Oh, thanks, Tony. I appreciate that. It's 11 p.m. in India. That's pretty late. I usually don't stay up that late anymore. I'm too old, and I have a 2-year-old, so I have to get sleep early. As you know, basically, otherwise I won't get any sleep because she wakes up too early in the morning. Pierce says, try Texas. Does Texas not get snow? I know that they get enormous balls of hail that destroy everything whenever those kinds of storms come through every year. Hey, Drishal, welcome for your first time on the live stream. So I did mention it in the chat, but for those of you who are here, if you don't mind clicking the like button on the video, you'll have to close the live chat if you're in the mobile app. If you close that and click the the like button, the thumbs up button, and then go back to live chat, for whatever reason, YouTube's algorithm on live streams will recommend the stream to more people if people click the like button. So just something that you can do if you want to help other people find the stream this morning. All right. So this morning I chose to use kind of a clickbaity title to be like the first topic for the stream, but it really is something that I think is worth talking about. Basically the idea of whether Emacs' future is in danger. The long story short is, well, we don't really know, but there is an article by Murilo Pereira, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, that came out like maybe a month ago, basically talking about the values of different editors, or the values of the teams and the communities around these various different editors. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit today because I found it to be a very interesting article, very well written article, and it sort of points to the sort of state of the world currently in the sort of programming editor landscape, and sort of what we can infer about that, about Emacs and about the future of Emacs. And since many of us here are using Emacs, I mean, you're here probably because you've seen my Emacs videos, we want to talk about how that impacts us as well. Thanks, Agostino. So let's see, let me pull up this article really quickly. Some of you probably have seen this already if you follow the, let's see, let's pull this up in Vimby. You've probably seen it if you use the ReMax subreddit, because it showed up there. Let me actually pull this up in Qt browser so it doesn't blind everyone. Let's see, is this gonna pull up Qt? There we go. Now let's open it here. I've got this sort of dark mode setting on Qt browser, so it automatically converts everything to a darker color theme, which makes it a little bit easier to read. I'll also move this over to the first workspace so that we can see it with the chat at the same time. So we're just gonna have a discussion about this. So if you have any questions or have any like comments to make at any time, please feel free to drop them in the chat there, and we'll integrate that into the discussion. But basically, this article talks about, like I said, the basically values of people who develop software, and also the values of the people who use the software. And he gives a good little table of values that you could say are used by these different editors. Like approachability, like focusing on doing one thing well, efficiency of editing, extensibility, freedom, integration, introspectability, keyboard centrism, maintainability, progressiveness, stability, text centrism, and velocity. And as you might notice or recognize, a few of these things here do correlate to Emacs, specifically the things around extensibility, freedom, and introspectability. And then some of these other values or qualities are attributed to other editors that are out in the landscape right now. So it's interesting to look at these through the lens of these values. And basically the way to define a value is basically the principles or the things that one cares about. And he has it here as defined as expressions of relative importance. I guess that's a very abstract philosophical way to put it, but basically a value is something that you care about. So different people use different editors for different reasons. You might use Vim because you prefer just to go with the Unix philosophy of each tool has its own standalone purpose and they shouldn't be trying to do everything in the kitchen sink. And then maybe you prefer like a fully integrated coding experience like you might get with VS Code, or maybe you like sort of like the more middle ground or more modern focused versions of Vim like Neovim, etc. Or maybe like Emacs, sort of like people here who want to use Emacs as like the foundation of crafting a system. So we're going to talk a little bit about the points that Murillo makes in this article, and also sort of my perspective on this as well. So he basically says that Emacs has these following core values: extensibility, freedom, introspectability, keyboard centrism, stability, and text centrism. And probably the one here that you're not really expecting is stability. And really what that means is Emacs over time, since the beginning of when Emacs was created, there's many core things about Emacs that haven't changed very much. And mainly the reason why is because people have been using Emacs for many, many years. There's people who have left comments on this channel saying they've been using Emacs for 15, 20 years. And probably they haven't really changed how they use Emacs very much over that time. They probably still got the same configuration they've been using, for the last 5 or 10 years. So whenever you have a program that's as long lasting as Emacs, a lot of times stability is really important because you don't want people to be broken by changes. If you basically say, okay, we've got this nice major version of Emacs, but then maybe two major versions later, it breaks all of people's configuration, like some very core pattern people use for their configuration, then people are not as likely to stick with your editor or stick with your program. I mean, it's basically like if you make people have to think and reorient the way they do things, then they're not gonna appreciate it very much. So basically, stability is a very big principle in Emacs, and it's proven to be a big principle because of the fact that you see that there's a lot of things in Emacs that are oriented toward either the origins of when it was used in a terminal, like it didn't have graphical Emacs in the past, or maybe like it was oriented towards the way that older systems work. So not even like Windows or Linux. It may be stuff from way before that, because Emacs was invented, I think, in like the early 80s, whenever, before personal computing was even a thing. So it's interesting to see how a program like Emacs can still stay relevant over the years while still maintaining the sort of legacy design and features inside of it. But then again, you could also say that, that stability also makes it so that people come to Emacs and say, what is the deal with all this like creaky old stuff? Or why don't they have things like, asynchronous operations? Or, what about like newer features that other editors have? Well, a lot of times you can't do those things without violating that value or that principle of stability. So I don't think that you should worry too much about stability. I don't think stability is a problem. I think it's a great thing, actually, because that means that you know that when you build a configuration or a workflow around Emacs, then you're really in it for the long haul. You don't have to worry that one day, the maintainers are just going to get crazy and decide to rewrite everything in Python or something like that. So you don't have to worry about those things. Text centrism is a very interesting property of Emacs where all of the user interface is text driven. And, there are cases where you might see buttons or text fields or images, but for the most part, all of the user interface is centered around text, which is unlike other editors where you may have user interface elements. You have, I guess it's kind of wrong to say that because Emacs does have a toolbar and a menu bar, etc. But those things, at least in my case, don't even factor into what I do. So, it is text centered because everything is about buffers and about how you navigate around with this sort of text-based interface. Let's see if anybody has any questions here. Bo says there are many editors that can save files, but only Emacs can save your souls. Yes, that's a pretty funny joke that goes around. I don't know if Emacs can save your soul, but it can definitely suck your brain into it and make you less productive on other things for a while. So let's move a little bit further through here. So. There was a quote here from Richard Stallman basically talking about Emacs is older than the operating systems people use today. It's much older than Linux, the kernel. The oldest design elements were not designed for the uses we make of them today, and since we wrote those, people have developed other areas of software which don't fit Emacs very well. So there are good reasons to redesign some of them. However, people actually use Emacs, so a greatly incompatible change in Emacs is as unthinkable as a greatly incompatible change in the New York City subway. We have to build new lines through the maze of underground pipes and cables. And basically the point there is that if you want to do anything, add any new major functionality to Emacs, you kind of have to try not to touch the rest of it to the extent that it breaks things for people, like people's ingrained patterns. So if you follow the Emacs Devel mailing list, you'll see a lot of discussions about this where people are sort of pushing for more modern things, but at the same time, the maintainers are trying to be like, well, we can't really do that because it's going to be a breaking change. So it's interesting. Basically, when you have a successful piece of software, you have to take these things into account because you don't want to alienate your users or run them off. So let's see. What is this next quote here? Yeah. I'm not going to read that whole thing. I don't want to read this article to you. I'm just going to pick out points that I think are interesting, basically. So speaking about Vim, Vim focuses on doing one thing well, especially editing efficiency. So obviously, if you know anything about Vim, the core feature that sort of gets replicated in many other editors is the modal editing, where you have normal mode, which can be used to use like single letter editing commands where you can like delete a whole line or delete a paragraph or transpose words or do all kinds of really cool and interesting stuff. And then you have like the insert mode for just typing like normal and visual mode for selections, etc. Editing efficiency was like the main value, the main principle in that editor. Also keyboard centrism because everything is key bindings. Also text centrism because, there's really no UI in Vim. I mean, there is GVim, the graphical interface for Vim, but much like Emacs, it has a toolbar and a menu bar and not much else. It also focuses on stability, and if you look at the quotes here from Bram Moulinar, who is the creator and maintainer of Vim, he basically says the same thing. He makes the development be slow on purpose and doesn't change much because he doesn't want to break things for people. And, this is why Vim and Emacs have been able to last so long. Vim and Emacs basically, they're sort of like the two, you could call them churches, or the two sort of main lines of thought in terms of code editors, and pretty much every other editor is inspired by those two in some way. And the reason why they last so long is because of this stability and the fact that the interface doesn't really focus you too much into a particular way of working necessarily. You can sort of pick how you work. So this is why these things last so long, because they're shapeable tools rather than just something where you have to fit your mind into the workflow of the people who design the program. And it discusses here basically the the people who created Neovim, basically the reason why they created Neovim is because of this stability. Bram Moolenaar was not interested, or the maintainers of Vim were not interested in accepting some patches related to multi-threaded plugins, because if you know anything about Emacs or Vim, at least traditionally in the past, there's extensibility you can do in those editors, but if you do certain types of tasks that are long running, then it might block the editor from being usable. So there's been efforts both in Emacs and in Vim to bring multi-threading or asynchronous operations so that it doesn't block the editor from being usable while this background task is happening. And because the creators of Neovim had trouble getting a patch like that accepted because it might break behavior of Vim, they decided that they might want to go off and do their own thing instead. And, you know, that's kind of a fortunate thing because I believe Neovim has been very successful as an alternative to Vim. They've done the very hard job of trying to maintain compatibility as much as possible with Vim, but also being very forward-thinking and bringing a lot of new features to the table. So this is a pretty rare example where I guess you could say a spiritual fork and not an actual fork. Maybe they did fork the code to begin with, but this fork actually is quite successful. There have been many forks of Emacs that have not been successful. Many times they fork off and then they eventually die because either people don't use them or they can't keep up with the mainline Emacs development, or the features sort of get merged back into Emacs eventually. So it's interesting to see how this goes over time. So Sergey says we need to rewrite and modernize Emacs using Rust. Well, there is a project for that called ReMax, ReMacs. Let me pull that up real quick. And they have been working very hard to basically do this, where they're trying to rewrite the core of Emacs in Rust. But I kind of think that the project has stalled because it's such a large project and very difficult to do that it's not really. I don't know. I think that if you're trying to basically rewrite an entire program that has existed for 30, 40 years with another core language is a very difficult task, and I don't know that it is the right approach. And Murillo basically says the same thing in this article, that, you know, forks of Emacs, even if it's to rewrite something, have not been very successful, mainly because it's a lot of work. It's not the kind of thing that you really want to spend your time on. In my opinion, if you want to rewrite Emacs, you better start with Emacs as inspiration and write something from the ground up that doesn't try to basically be Emacs. That way you have more freedom in innovating and not having to hold on to the past. Yeah, Chen says that the last commit to ReMax is in August. Yeah, I don't know that they're actually working on that right now. Fresh God X says, do you think an Emacs fork can take over? It's been tried many times before and it's never happened. I think it would have to be a new editor that is not Emacs before that. Before that was going to work. So Agostina says, why Rust instead of C? Well, the main reason for Rust is because it has more modern affordances as a programming language, but it still has the native performance of C. And it also has a heavy emphasis on ensuring memory safety, which, you know, it avoids things like crashes and whatnot. But also, I think that the programming model of Rust makes it easier for you to write better memory management in your code so that you are managing it more effectively. It's not just about memory leaks either. It's more about like how you design your code, and it sort of forces you to design things in a certain way that actually work better towards memory and performance, I believe. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting language, and I'm actually interested in learning some more about it. But yeah, I don't really have a good understanding of the deepness of Rust yet. Yanuel Avila says one innovation in Emacs would be JIT. Yes, that's what's happening right now with the native. What was it called? Native compile branch. I forgot which branch it is, but basically, it is a version of Emacs that is Emacs, but it's using the libgcc JIT library to do just-in-time compilation of Emacslisp code to native code. So right now, the most you can get for performance in Emacs, in Emacs 27 or Emacs 28 as it is in master, is to do byte compilation of the code, where you are taking Emacslisp code and you're making it compile down to an intermediate level byte code, which is not actual machine code. So it's faster to interpret that than it is to interpret the actual Emacslisp expressions, and it can provide a performance increase, but it doesn't actually turn into real machine code that can run as fast as the machine can run. So the whole idea of JIT, J-I-T, or just-in-time compilation is that you can compile it down to native code dynamically at runtime and then be able to run it at native performance. And this is something that actually is currently working in that branch. I know a few people who have tried it and have had some success with it, but it's going to take some time before they're actually able to get that merged into master and have it be something that works without any kinds of sort of friction. So this back to this idea of stability. This is a very big change. It's a very core change to Emacs, and it has great potential to make Emacs a lot faster for everyone, but they have to be very careful about when they merge it in, because otherwise they might break Emacs for everybody. So they're definitely trying to avoid that. Sanad says, I thought Lisp was sacred. Why use Rust? Well, Lisp is great as an application level programming language. It's also great as a systems programming language, but if you want to actually do low level coding, you need to have a language like Rust or C or C++ that can deal with memory directly rather than through like a garbage collection layer, because Lisps typically have a garbage collector attached, which basically means the Lisp runtime is doing the allocation of objects for you. And it will also manage the lifetime and the deallocation of memory. So it doesn't allow you to do that low-level memory management, which is needed for high-performance programs. And Mr. 22B here mentions a very important topic, which is data-oriented programming, which basically, if you want your program to be very fast, you need to allocate and organize your memory in a way where it works with the CPU cache. And you can't do that so easily with a Lisp unless the Lisp is designed to make use of the CPU cache effectively. Apparently, the for-coder editor, which I've heard about and I have not actually used before, apparently uses data-oriented programming for its internals, which is an interesting thought because that could make it a lot faster. Data-oriented programming is pretty hard, though. I was trying to write a game engine earlier this year using data-oriented programming, and it can be a little bit brain-busting depending on what you're trying to do. Okay, I'll call you John. John. Let's see. What else? Numbra says, will the replay be available on the channel? Yes, it will definitely be available. So... Chitty, is that how you pronounce your name? Thank you for your Emacs content from Nepal. Sadly, none of his friends uses this amazing Lisp interpreter package as a text editor. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain that to people, that this is basically a Lisp environment that just happens to have, user interface and a text editor attached to it, but it's pretty amazing. Yes, Chen says, Emacs is written in Lisp, but Lisp is written in C. ReMax tries to rewrite that Lisp in Rust. Well, no, they're trying to rewrite the low-level functions of Emacs in Rust. I think that they're not really trying to do the Emacslisp to Rust. I think it's mainly that the core functions, you'll find a lot of functions in Emacs that will say that they actually are defined in C code, and these are the functions that ReMax is trying to replace. They're trying to rewrite everything so that it actually uses Rust for those C-level functions, the native level functions. Mr. 22B says, for data-oriented programming, check out Jonathan Blowstreams and check out his language Jai. Yeah, Jai sounds pretty cool, but he's been working on it forever, and I haven't actually seen it get released. I'm actually more interested in the language Zig as an alternative to Rust because it's pretty cool. Bo says, is Emacs source code too big? That's a great question. I think, yes, it is too big. I think that the reason why the source code is too big is because there's a lot of built-in packages. Like, for example, let me show you this package that someone pointed me to the other day. Or actually, it's not a package, it's functionality. If you run metax happy, where is it? Oh, it's not here? That's weird. It was on my other machine. There was like a happy birthday command, basically. But there's all kinds of stuff. Okay, you want to see something? You can play Pong. So let's just play Pong in Emacs right now. Okay, so why is there Pong in Emacs? Well, because Emacs is not meant to be just a text editor. It's also meant to be a computing environment. Let's see if I can kill Pong. And there's a lot of stuff in here that, in my opinion, doesn't need to be in here. But I think Emacs was sort of created back in a time where there wasn't this concept of package managers. So people were sharing code basically on websites or via email, and there wasn't a way to just easily pull down a package like there is today in an Emacs. So a lot of stuff got added to the core of Emacs to make it useful in the box. But these days, I think if Emacs were to start over, probably they wouldn't do that. They would just make use of package ecosystems like happens now, to pull things into Emacs without having to put so much stuff in the box. I feel like it's just like too much stuff that's in here. One day I would like to go through and try to find all this cool stuff and take a look at it just to see, you know, what you can do with the in the box editor. But I just feel like there's a lot of stuff here that doesn't need to be here. Yeah, FreshGodX says doctor. There is basically a chatbot inside of Emacs. So you've probably heard of chatbots where you can have a conversation with some AI, but in Emacs there is the doctor program. If you use MetaX Doctor, and basically it says it's a psychotherapist. You can type your problems, and then it will give you an answer. So what do you do when you're live streaming and Emacs crashes? Type ret twice. Emacs, I would appreciate it if you would continue. See, it's just like some silly games here. But I guess if you want someone to talk to and nobody's nearby, you can talk to the doctor function. But anyway, yes, this sort of baggage that Emacs has with all this functionality and packages is actually another interesting thing to think about in the terms of stability. Do you think that people are going to be upset if the Pong function or the doctor function in Emacs breaks in a certain way? That's a lot of code to try to maintain over time and try to make it not be brittle. So it's really weird to have an editor to have so many features, but also at the same time have this principle of stability, because it's just such a broad surface area that you have to keep everything working over a long period of time. Okay, let's get back to the article here. So the point that Marilu is making about Neovim here is that Neovim's principles are more aligned with sort of modern development practices. And what that means is that development is typically done at a faster pace, releases are done at a faster pace, and things are more decentralized in the sense that different components are sort of developed independently. Also, testing plays a very large role, automated CI, and also decoupling the core from the user interface so that there could be multiple user interface implementations that are not even part of the Neovim core that could be used with the core. For instance, you may not know this, but you can actually use the core of Neovim in VS Code so that it can drive the Vim emulation. So it's a very weird thing you can do with Neovim's core, but it was designed in the way where the core could be used in other places to implement things that you didn't really realize was possible. And also, basically being able to develop it in a way where it's easier, like there's a lower barrier to entry for new contributors. And this is definitely a problem for Emacs and other GNU projects because most of the development is done on mailing lists and patches are actually sent via email. There's no website where people are sending pull requests like you're used to on GitHub. It's like fully email-driven development workflow. All issues are filed via email for the most part. There are bug trackers, but I think they're actually pulling the bugs from emails. So it's a very different mindset than what people are used to today. Sites like GitHub and GitLab and some of the other sort of alternative Git forges, you could call them, or Git hosts, they have really changed the way that people think about collaborative development, and they've made it easier for someone to clone the Git repository. I mean, Git itself has helped a lot in that regard too because of the decentralized nature of it. But you can fork and clone the repository, you can make some change, and then you can submit a pull request, which basically says, I have these changes, take a look at them, and then merge them into your code base if you think that they are something you would want to take. So it's very different than what you do with Emacs, and anybody who's contributed to open source or free software on GitHub or GitLab, etc., who wants to come contribute to Emacs is going to have a hard time wrapping their head around the development flow and the contribution flow. I had to deal with this a little bit whenever I was contributing to the GNU Guix Linux distribution, basically contributing some package definitions to Guix. I had to learn the process for contributing a package, which is basically making a patch and then sending it via email, and somebody will decide if they want to take it, and if they do, they will apply it themselves to their local copy of the Guix repository and then push it up to the remote repository. So It's very different. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and it can feel a little bit weird compared to the ways that we're used to doing things these days. So anyway, back on point. So Murilu says that Neovim has the following values: approachability, editing efficiency, extensibility, keyboard centrism, progressiveness, text centrism, and velocity. So progressiveness and velocity being sort of the two differences here than the other ones we've been talking about so far. Whereas progressiveness is that sort of new type of development model where you're using a website to do the collaboration. Also, the velocity being sort of the pace at which they do updates. So Emacs, if you haven't really used Emacs for a long time, what you'll eventually find is that you don't get Emacs major version updates very frequently. It could be every 1 year, 2 years, etc. And there might be a minor version release in between that time to fix bugs that were found with a major release. But it's not something where you would see a new update every month with like incremental improvements or incremental fixes. So Neovim has this newer model, which you see in a lot of more sort of, I don't really know, I wouldn't call it like modern development platforms, but I guess you could call it modern development platforms like, let's say, Node.js or Go or Rust, etc., where you see a lot more frequent updates to packages and components. That doesn't necessarily mean that more updates is better. It could also be more likely to break things, but this is what people are more used to these days. Let's see. Astrocat says, progress defined by who? Newer is not necessarily better. Yes, I agree. Newer is not necessarily better. And this is why stability is also an important thing for you if you don't want to be broken by new things. So Emacs is good for that in that case. Let's see. Yeah, so another thing that Neovim is good about is out-of-the-box experience. I mean, this is definitely a problem with people coming to Emacs, and this is why I have the Emacs from Scratch series, basically to help people with the out-of-the-box experience. Like, you start Emacs and you're like, what is this thing? I don't really know if this is for me. But, you know, if you learn how to configure it correctly, then it can be a great thing. And also, that's the reason why Doom Emacs, Space Macs, Prelude, etc., all these configuration bundles exist as well, because, you know, it's better if you can start using Emacs using something that's pre-configured, or at least makes it easy to get started with a nice configuration, because it really shows you what the power of Emacs is. Neovim has this out of the box, so you don't really have to worry as much about that. So the point that Murilu makes here is that code is the easy part of building software. I mean, like, writing code is the easy part, but the process and the management of the development flow is really the hard part. One of the points being made here is that Emacs highly values freedom, which means that it uses the GPL license, and the GPL, at least in the case of Emacs, requires copyright assignment, which means if you want to contribute code to Emacs, like non-trivial code, like not fixing a spelling mistake or adding a one-line comment, but if you want to contribute a package or a function or something to Emacs, you have to do copyright assignment. And the problem with that is that, well, there's two problems. There's a multitude of problems, but let's talk about them in order. But the first problem is not everyone can sign a copyright assignment form, because what it says in the copyright assignment form is that you're giving your copyright to the code that you've produced to the Free Software Foundation so that they own it now. You're assigning your copyright over to them, and you are disclaiming any right that you have to that code. Now, if you are a professional software developer, it is very likely that you signed an IP agreement whenever you joined the company that you joined, which says that they really own the code that you write under certain circumstances. So if you are going to contribute to Emacs and you work at a large company that made you sign an IP agreement, you're going to have to talk to the legal team at your company to see if you are able to assign your copyright to your contributions to Emacs, because depending on how that IP agreement is written, you may not have the right to do that. So if you are going to contribute to Emacs and you're in the situation, do not just ignore this, because it could be a huge problem. Just make sure that you follow the right process, talk to the legal people at your company before trying to assign copyright to the Free Software Foundation. So the reason why I mention all that is because it is a barrier to contribution. Smart people who have good jobs, paying jobs that, work at companies that have these IP agreements can't contribute to Emacs if they can't do copyright assignment. And that's kind of a risky thing, because like the people who are probably the majority of the people who use Emacs are people who are being paid to write code. And if they can't contribute to Emacs, then there's kind of a problem. So the other problem is, which Marilu mentions here, is that a project like use package that has like basically used by everyone and has universal utility that would be great if it was a part of Emacs can't be brought into Emacs until all the people who have contributed to use package have done copyright assignment to the Free Software Foundation. So if someone writes a really great package like use package and wants to bring it into Emacs, they have to go bug everyone who ever contributed something that's non-trivial to their project to do the FSF copyright assignment to bring that code into Emacs. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I think it's great that the Free Software Foundation focuses on freedom and wants to make sure that the code can be used by anyone. But I also think that it is a handicap in the sense that it keeps them from getting contributions from people who would love to be able to contribute. Let's see, any questions here? Okay. So it's, this does sort of put the future of Emacs in jeopardy a little bit. And now we're back to that sort of clickbait title that I had on the video, where you have to wonder with the development workflow of Emacs, where they do everything via mailing lists, which is sort of alien to people who are newer to programming and would be interested in contributing, and also the copyright assignment issues, and also the fact that Emacs is written in C, which let's say not as many people are using C these days. Which I'm not saying it should be rewritten. I'm just saying that it's a consideration to make. It puts Emacs at a risk because there's not as many people who are willing and able to make contributions to the core of Emacs to maintain it going forward. So what I would say is anyone who cares about Emacs, cares about the future of Emacs, if you can contribute to Emacs, you should. You should learn the code of Emacs so that you can understand how to help with the maintenance of the lower level parts of it, because this is the only way that Emacs is going to continue on into the future. The people who are currently maintaining Emacs are doing it on their own time for free, I think, and they can't last forever. There's going to need to be a new set of people who come along and do maintenance on Emacs in the future for it to continue. So if you care about Emacs, you definitely need to try to get involved in some way. So I would say if you are an enthusiastic user of Emacs, you've been using Emacs for a while, a year or 2 years or something like that, you've gotten comfortable with Emacs, you understand the concepts of Emacs, and you kind of want to take your Emacs knowledge further, try to find a way to contribute to the Emacs code base if you can, if you're not encumbered by some IP agreement that keeps you from doing so. I intend to do the same thing whenever I'm able to, because I would love to contribute. I love writing, Lisp parsers, Lisp compilers, etc. So I would love to contribute to the core elements of Emacs and Emacslisp, etc. But right now I can't. So I'm just telling you that I'm recommending this to you, and I'm saying I will do it myself in the future as well. Let's see, any other questions here? Mr. 22B says you should check out Doom Emacs, less bloated than Spacemacs. I don't know if it's less bloated, but it seems to focus more on performance in the way that it's made, and it also seems to be easier to configure than Spacemacs. I used Spacemacs in the past, and the whole layers approach I found to be a little bit harder to deal with, but that's my sort of uninformed opinion because I haven't looked at it in a long time. So Pierce asks us, can you somehow marry eLisp with Common Lisp? Actually, there is some built-in functions in Emacs that will replicate common things in Common Lisp, like the way that you define functions in Common Lisp and some of the control structures, etc. So there is some sort of marrying of that there. But basically, if you're asking, can Emacs be rewritten onto an existing Common Lisp implementation? Probably not. I mean, one of the forks of Emacs that has been promoted and tried to be done over the last maybe 10 years, maybe longer than that, is a version of Emacs that uses Guile Scheme as the core instead of Emacs' own Emacslisp interpreter. The reason why that is even possible is because Guile Scheme has the possibility of parsing and using different languages. So not only can it do Scheme, it can also do Python and JavaScript and Emacslisp. So it has a mode to interpret Emacslisp. However, It doesn't evaluate Emacslisp the same way. The semantics of the language kind of changes somewhat, so it's never been successful because you cannot do just like, you can't just replace the core of Emacs with Guile scheme or a common Lisp implementation and expect it to work. It's going to require a lot of work, and it may not be worth it. At this point, it's better to just continue trying to improve the built-in Emacslisp interpreter than try to use some other system at the core, I think. Let's see. Mr. 22B asked me, what's your dream editor features? Well, let's say that Emacs is my dream editor or my dream program. But if I were to do Emacs over again, well, first of all, I would definitely not add all that extra stuff inside of Emacs. I would come up with a system where there's a very light core to Emacs that has all the basic stuff you need for building out your own configuration on top of it. And then I would have a very solid extensibility system built into it that is, I mean, like Emacs package system is kind of bolted on, but there's probably a way to do it in a more native way so that you have the ability to run like multiple versions of a package at the same time. And also have like better support for programming library packages. So basically, instead of having a big editor that has a lot of features built in, you have a small core that either can be bundled with some extensibility functionality in a way that makes it easy as an out-of-the-box experience, or you have a small core that an experienced user can then take any pieces they want and build on top of that and have a very lean experience. Sort of like how you can do that with Linux with certain distributions. With GNU Linux, you can have a distribution that just has only the stuff that you want installed on it, sort of like the way that I do with GNU Geeks. I only put on the packages that are relevant for my own setup and workflow. So I think that is what I would do primarily. But a lot of the same functionality that Emacs already has is something I would try to replicate, because I think that the discoverability, the way that commands are set up, the way that completions work in Emacs, I think there's a lot of things about the Emacs user interface that's really great and was really the right way to do things. And I think that, like for me, it's very efficient the way that this whole thing works. It could be faster, it could be faster in the way that it executes. It could be more modern in some ways. It would be nice if I could easily embed a browser window and have it have the full capabilities of Emacs. Now, obviously, there's ways to do that right now. I mean, you see me, right? I have a browser window here, but it's not fully integrated. There's like Emacs WebKit, but I don't really know how good that is yet. I haven't tried it. But anyway, point being, I would try to just, rethink the core a little bit and make it more streamlined. Let's see. Peter says that he had to rewrite his path to get acceptable performance and other tweaks. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see here. Emacs. All right. Jafer says it would be nice if it could work with Wayland. Yeah, I haven't used Wayland very much. I mean, you can't use Wayland with EXWM. If you don't know that already, EXWM is very tied to the Xorg window system, the X window system. And Wayland is basically a different implementation of a windowing system for Linux. So since Emacs is tied to X, it can't be used with Wayland currently. I believe there is a PGTK build of Emacs, but I think that's only to like boot directly into Emacs and not into X. I'm not sure about that entirely. If anybody knows anything about PGTK, let me know in the chat. Yeah, so Wayland, I don't really know what the benefits of Wayland are, to be honest. I know that it's supposed to be more modern and supports different graphics hardware better, but I don't know. It's still like too risky to use it because a lot of things don't work anymore in GNU Linux. So it's better to stick with what we have at the moment anyway, until more things have been moved over. Okay, let's get back to the article because I've sort of digressed a lot here. So the next thing is talking about VS Code. And as you know, VS Code has grown into a very popular editor. And the main reason why is because they focus on approachability primarily. Like, it's easy to get started with VS Code because you just install it and it has a lot of functionality in the box for the stuff you might want to use. And then also it's very easy to install extensions. They say that, he says here that integration is a value. And yet, I mean, it does have a lot of extensibility points in there. Maintainability is a value. What did he describe maintainability as? I don't even remember anymore. Whoops, that's the wrong window. Let's see. Maintainability is a degree to which it can be modified without introducing faults. Yes, absolutely. I mean, the extensibility system of VS Code is very different than Emacs in that the code for an extension is not being run in the same process as the main editor of VS Code. And they do that specifically so that an extension cannot cause VS Code to crash, or at least to the extent that is possible. Where is the... Yeah, here it is. Progressiveness and velocity. I mean, VS Code is developed in the open on GitHub, so progressiveness and velocity definitely are both accounted for there. And he also gives this table of basically, the values of all these different editors and which boxes they check. And, it seems that Neovim checks probably more than anyone else in terms of it being modern and approachable and still having a lot of the same benefits of Vim and Emacs. So it's interesting to see that. However, some of these values may not matter to you, and that's also part of the point of this article, that values are what's important here. What you value dictates what you use and what you contribute to. So you have to make the decision yourself about which of these values are more important. For me, obviously, between all the choices listed above, Emacs is the choice for me because of my personal values. Particularly the ones that are the most important to me are extensibility and introspectability and integration, in the sense that you can customize the environment to your taste and you can replace components. You can do basically whatever you want to with it. It's interesting that the Atom editor was not mentioned here, probably because a lot of people have forgotten about Atom by this point. But Atom actually was more like Emacs than any of the other things here that I can think of, because Atom also allows you to evaluate arbitrary JavaScript and change out components of the editor and basically turn off anything that's built in. So that was a very interesting example of doing an Electron-based Emacs-like editor that was a little bit more modern and approachable. But rest in peace, Atom. Well, I'm not saying Atom's dead. I'm just saying that I don't think really anybody thinks about Atom anymore, even though it's still out there. It's still being maintained. You can still use it. Let's see. So let's just skip on ahead. Let's get this topic done with, because we've been talking about this for about an hour. So yeah, so the last thing here is just basically merely talking about the threat to Emacs. Excuse me. So what he says, and I kind of agree with, is that and yet, even being a very enthusiastic Emacs user, I have a hard time recommending it to folks who mostly just want to get stuff done. Some will argue that those aren't willing to build their computing environment from scratch shouldn't be using the power tool like Emacs anyway. But he says, I don't see a fundamental reason for that to be the case, and believe that not having young folks trying out, using, and contributing to Emacs is not a good thing for Emacs. So I think this is really the crux of the article, that Emacs is meant for a certain type of person, and that certain type of person generally is not the majority of people these days in the programming realm. The majority of people are using Neovim, VS Code, or maybe like IntelliJ editors, etc. So the less people who really get into Emacs and are able to contribute to Emacs, the more at risk it is in the future for not really having maintainership. Now, I don't think that Emacs is going to disappear, because there's plenty of people who love Emacs. I mean, many of the people who are here in the chat right now love Emacs. They're here on the channel because they've been learning about Emacs. And there's many people on Reddit. There's many people in the discussion lists that love Emacs. Plenty of people on IRC, etc. So there's a whole community around Emacs. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. However, we have to keep in mind the potential effects of the development workflow of Emacs, how approachable it is for contribution, and also, maybe you could say how approachable it is as an editor. But I think Doom Emacs and Spacemacs have done a pretty good job of making it more approachable, because many people are trying those out these days, I think. So really, it's really just a matter of contribution to Emacs. What we need is to make sure that there's plenty of people who can contribute to Emacs core and understand it, so that it can continue to be maintained going forward. So this quote here from Eli Zaretsky in 2015 also basically says that. One of the gravest problems I see for future of Emacs development is that we slowly but steadily lose old-timers who know a lot about the Emacs internals and have lots of experience hacking them, whereas the newcomers mostly prefer working on application-level code in Lisp, basically packages that are built into Emacs. If its tendency continues, we will soon lose ability to make deep infrastructure changes, i.e. we will be unable to add new features that need non-trivial changes on the seed level. Emacs needs people who can contribute to this stuff. I mean, it's very important for the future of Emacs. So like I said, if you're interested in the future of Emacs and you want to learn how to do native coding, if you want to learn how to write a compiler or an interpreter, figure out how to to contribute to Emacs, because it's going to help the future of Emacs as a whole. All right, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about here. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, so there's a little bit about the different forks here, I think. Yeah, another good point here. Emacs doesn't need a Neo Emacs as much as Vim needed Neovim. Unlike Vim, Emacs always had a rich ecosystem of active contributors and maintainers who listened to user feedback. There's still tension rooted in ideology and values, which throughout Emacs history materialized as forks: Lucid X Emacs, Guile Emacs, Aquamax, the Mac port, and ReMax. Forking is incredibly difficult to pull off. Yes. If you want to fork Emacs, you're going to have a hard time because it's a big program and you have to maintain all of it, or you have to make it substantively better somehow. And that's hard to do because, you need to have at least as much people who are contributing to Emacs currently to do that. So instead of thinking about forks, we should be thinking about contributing to Emacs, or start a completely new editor. Don't try to fork Emacs and change the code. Try to just start from scratch with some different values and different paradigm that takes inspiration from Emacs, but doesn't try to basically re-implement it. Joseph Rano says, this is in part why it's helpful or useful to write an eLisp interpreter in a modern language. Good C programmers may be hard to find. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a reason to try to rewrite the eLisp interpreter in Rust, but the problem is the core Emacs maintainers are probably not going to accept a merge request to redo everything in Rust, because then they would have to learn Rust and it would change everything for current contributions. So you wouldn't be able to do that unless you did a fork, and forks are not going to be successful. So this is just the world that we live in right now. All right, so I think that's enough for that article. Hopefully that was interesting to you. Feel free to have some more comments here in the chat, and we can discuss it for a little bit. I'm gonna grab some more water here because my throat is starting to bother me here. Peter, which link are you speaking of? I can try to help you there. Firelights. You should scroll back and watch the last 50 minutes of conversation. Basically, they need more people to help with the core development of Emacs. It's not necessarily in danger so much as it is. Basically, you need to help Emacs continue to be maintained going forward for it to live. All right, so I just want to show this real quick. I don't know if you can even see it. My wife gave me a System Crafters branded coffee cup for my birthday this week, which I think is pretty awesome. So I'm trying to sip water out of this the whole time. Yes, Piotr, I am drinking water on screen because otherwise my throat will explode. All right, so next topic. So here's something I've been doing this week. Yesterday morning, I was switching between two projects. So like I've been using my computer for work and for personal stuff as well, or just projects for projects in general. And once again, I started thinking to myself, well, it'd be nice if I could have two different workspaces where the buffers for the different things I'm working on are not sort of all jammed together. So someone, thanks, Tomas. Someone suggested to me in the Discord, and if you don't know about the Discord, check the link in the pinned chat item there, then you can join the Discord. Recommended perspective.el, and I have used that in the past, but I think that there was a point in the past where it just didn't really make sense to me to try to use it, so I shelved it and just went back to just normal EXWM workspaces. Piotr says you should consider selling those cups. I would buy for sure. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I need to find a way to set that up. If anybody knows any good printing, on-demand printing companies, let me know. So I made a video recently, maybe a couple months ago, about tab bar mode and how that can be used for workspaces. And I think that's a very nice way. That's a nice thing that's built into Emacs 28. But it doesn't have the ability to restrict the list of buffers for the workspace that you're currently on, or the tab you're currently on. Perspective.el is, it does have that capability where you can restrict the buffers to the workspace that you're set to. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about why you would want to do either of these things and maybe which one might be better. This may not be a very long discussion, and I'm certainly interested to hear your thoughts in the chat as we go. So maybe what I'll do is try to pull up the Emacs from scratch config and try it there. Yeah, I don't want to break my Emacs while I'm streaming because everything will crash. So let me see here. Did I say 28? I meant Emacs 27. Let's pull up eShell real quick, and then maybe I can load that up. So run. I don't even know what state this config is in right now, so if it totally gets hosed, then we'll see what happens. No, I don't want to compile vterm. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to drop this somewhere. I'm not going to commit this to the config. We're just going to experiment a little bit. Yeah, Joseph, I haven't used tab line mode because I don't really like tabs for open files, but I have used tab bar mode. So basic UI config. Yeah, we'll just put this at the bottom. I don't really care. Astercat says, does perspective.el make sort of workspaces in Emacs? Yep, it does. So we're just going to drop this config in. This is what I've been working on for my personal config. And I'll explain what it does in just a second. All right, end of file during parsing. Oh yeah, that's because I need to full screen this. It's kind of a pain sometimes using this embedded Emacs because you have to full screen it before the key bindings work. All right, so did that work? Ariel asked, do you know workgroups mode? I have heard of it. I haven't tried it at all. Is it any good? Come on now, save it. So persp mode. Excuse me. Interesting, it doesn't actually show. There it goes, finally. So as you can see, there is a, hey Eric, there's now a thing in the mode line here for main. So that is the default workspace. But if I were to do something like meta-x, man, I'm gonna have to use this full screen. Meta-x, persp, is it create or switch? Yeah, persp switch. I can say EFS as a perspective name. And now I have two workspaces here. One's called EFS, one is called main. So let me just make a window config here, and then I can use persp next to switch to the next one, which is main, and I can also have a split here. And now I'm able to basically switch between these two workspaces with persp next. And I think this one is main. It already has some buffers open. However, if you go to this one and you use switch to buffer, you'll see that there's no buffers listed here if you look at the echo area. And then if you go to the EFS workspace, no, this is main workspace, and if you list the buffers, then there's some other buffers. So basically, whenever you start up into Emacs with perspective mode turned on, persp mode turned on, it will take whatever buffers you have and add them to that default workspace. And then when you create a new workspace, you have a clean buffer list, basically, that only has what you have opened inside of it. So I've got this stuff bound in a way that works with my key binding setup. So Control-Alt-N goes to the next workspace, so it's very easy to switch between those. And then I'm also rebinding my normal buffer switching key binding to the persp council switch buffer. Since I use council and Ivy, I use that this special version of the switch buffer command in perspective mode so that I only get the list of buffers that are in the current workspace, and also it does previewing, so when I switch the buffers in the list, it will show me while I'm moving through them. So it basically allows me to have my same setup, but also have this separation using the different workspaces. Now, if I jump back over to the EFS workspace, right now, if we try to switch buffers, there's only the scratch buffer here that was created for this workspace. But if I use the universal key binding, Control-U, and then oh, wow, that was weird. Okay, maybe that's in the other configuration. Anyway, universal argument, then switch buffer. Okay, so now I can select any buffer that's open in Emacs, and it will drop it into this workspace as well. So I can pick emacs.org, and now if I switch buffers again, it will tell me that I have these here. But it also seems like it has added the other buffers because I previewed them, which is not what I would expect. So anyway, it does give you the ability to have separate workspaces for different things you're doing, and those workspaces have their own names. And also the interesting thing is, this is per frame. So as we talked about in the Emacs desktop environment series, EXWM uses independent frames for each workspace. So since perspective mode has perspectives per workspace, perspectives per frame, workspaces per frame, that means that if I were to jump to EXWM workspace 0, then it doesn't have oh no, that's wrong. It doesn't have the same workspaces because it's per frame. And now I think I've gotten myself into trouble with the full screenness of this. Okay, we're good. So basically, in EXWM, you would be able to have, let's say, 4 workspaces, EXWM workspaces, and each of those workspaces would have their own sort of sub workspaces for things that you're doing, which is kind of interesting. It might be kind of conducive for a good workflow, but it does require a third-party package. It's not something that's built in, which may not matter to you. It doesn't really matter so much to me, but it's a consideration to be made. But the question then becomes, do you really get any real value from having separate lists of buffers for each workspace? So I'm sort of on the fence about this, because it is kind of a pain that I'm on a particular workspace. I do the buffer list, and the buffer that I'm looking for that I know is open is not here. So either I have to switch workspaces or I have to move that buffer to this workspace, or I have to reopen the file again or something. So the question is it worth it to have those things separated? I'm starting to think it's no, because with Emacs, the fact that you can easily filter your buffers with a good completion framework like Helm or Ivy, I don't know how much it actually matters to have your buffers split up, because if I go back to my own Emacs config here, and I use, my normal buffer switching command, I get all the information about the different modes that are active. I get all the files that are open, which projects they're part of, with all of this stuff. And I can type, excuse me, whatever I want. Oh, my camera froze. Oh, geez. Again, it's doing the same thing. Let me see if I can disable it. I love it when that happens. Okay, now you don't get to see my frozen face. Thank you. Let's see if turning it back on helps. Nope. Yeah, for some reason, OBS just decides to completely freak out sometimes. I'm going to try to reconnect the camera. Yeah, it's not working at all. Okay, we'll just have no camera the rest of the time. Sorry for that. All right, so basically what I'm thinking is that it's not necessarily that useful to have buffers separated. However, I am sort of interested in people's perspectives on that, because I want to know if there is a benefit to having these buffer lists be separated, because it'd be nice if there was a good workflow for that. But let me try unplugging the camera and putting it back in. I would like to actually have a camera, because I can't see you, or I can't see me. Whoa. And then my audio stopped. This is why you shouldn't mess with your stuff in the middle of a stream. Can you hear me now? All right. Experimentation, folks. That's what we're doing here. Okay, I think I'm going to be back now. Hey, that worked. Okay. So can everybody still hear me? I don't know if it changed my audio devices and caused a problem. Okay, great. All right, anyway, that was sort of the idea that I had, was, whether it's worth it to have these separate workspaces with tab bar mode. If I were to turn that on, so let's say tab bar mode. Now we see that we have these tabs at the top, and I can hit tab bar, I think it's create? I don't even remember. Tab bar new tab. I can have multiple tabs here that I can switch between. I can name those whatever I want. And if I open up the buffer list, then it gives me the list of buffers again, and I can get to everything that I want, basically. And, you get the same ability to have split windows. Like, for instance, you can see that I'm switching between these two tabs, and one of them has this EXWM window for my chat open, and then the other one doesn't. I could have a different window layout entirely. and it still gets maintained across both of those, but I still have all the buffer list that I had before. So I think maybe that's better as a way to separate things. And Joseph says, with tab bar mode, you can have more easily have one buffer per window, and now you have a different mechanism for jumping to the exact buffer you need. Yeah, that's true. Joseph also says, I don't think having separate buffer lists are as useful. We have to remember what the essence of the problem is. How do I get to the buffer that I want in as efficient a manner as possible? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Piotr says, fuzzy finder in buffers is good enough for basically any amount of open buffers. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. It's like, it's nice. It feels nice and clean to have your buffer lists separate, but when it comes down to it, it actually makes it more annoying in Emacs, I think. Yes, Matthew, it says exactly my next point. He says, regarding isolating buffers, if I want isolated buffers, I would prefer the projectile find buffer command. Yes, it's absolutely true. So basically, there's another way to focus which buffers you get based on which project you're in currently, and that's to use projectile. And in my case, cancel projectile find file is a way to find files in the project, and there's also a switch to buffer, which will tell me which buffers are open in the context of that project. So you can, yes, Astrocat, it is just in version 27 and above. You can use that projectile switch to buffer to switch to only buffers that are open for that project, which can be pretty helpful in that case, because really, in most cases, what you want is to find another buffer in the same project you're working on without looking at all the other random buffers you have open in Emacs. Now, there are some rare cases where there's a list of buffers that I only want to see in a certain context, like let's say IRC buffers or chat buffers. And I don't have really a good solution for that, but it's something that would be nice to have conditionally. Like basically, if I'm on Emacs workspace, EXWM workspace 0, I have a different buffer switching mechanic, and thanks to Emacslisp, I can do that. I can make my own switch to buffer command that checks which workspace I'm on and then runs a different function for filtering the buffer list. So it's something that I can do, and I haven't actually done yet, but I'm thinking about it. So basically, you need it's almost like for different parts of your workflow, you need different behavior and you need different commands for that. And you need a way to set all that up. So this is sort of like the power of Emacs, where you can come up with what workflow you want and then write the code to make that happen. So maybe in a future stream, I'll try to do that. I'll try to write the code to do that. Astrocat asks, is it a huge pain to build Emacs? No, it's not that bad. I mean, you just have to have all the necessary dependencies installed, and there's good instructions on how to do that. And then it should just build without much trouble. Tomas says, IntelliJ has Command E, which shows tool windows in a separate column from source code buffers. That's interesting. Let's see. Pierce says, in regard to the earlier article, maybe design a new Lisp language to run parallel to the Elisp runtime with modern design. It's possible to do that, but it also would probably be a little bit painful. Okay, so the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about today, and feel free to suggest topics or ask questions anytime, and I'll pull those up too. But I was thinking about looking at the dotfiles management package that we've been talking about in the Emacslisp series. So one thing I didn't do that I should have done before I started that series was actually write the full final package that we're going to sort of work up to in that series. And the reason why it would be good to do that is so that we sort of know where we're headed. I could have given you an example of how it looks, and then we will sort of show how we're going to build up to that. So since I didn't do that, what I thought I might do is spend a little bit of time in some of these streams working on parts of it before I do the actual video for that in the Emacslisp series. So one thing I was thinking about in the dotfiles management package is that it would be useful to have a minor mode for the package so that it can enable certain behavior, like the auto-tangling of org mode buffers or certain things like that. And since we're going to have a video probably in a week or two about minor modes, maybe major modes, it'd be good for me to go ahead and write the minor mode for this package first so that we sort of know what it looks like before I go and try to make the content for that video. So I'm going to grab this code and put it into an Emacslisp file. I mean, I could probably just write it here, but I don't really want to work in an Emacslisp, an org mode buffer. Nick says, any advice on managing shells? It's nice to have a workspace for shells. One thing that's kind of nice for shells is having like one of these toggle packages where you can hit a key binding and the shell will sort of pop up in a window at the bottom of the screen. Then you can hit another key to make it go away. One package that I use for that is called eShell Toggle, I think. Yeah, eShell Toggle. I don't actually use that this much, but if I were to hit Control Alt single quote, it pops up a shell at the very bottom that actually is aligned with the project that I'm currently working in. In this case, it's my dotfiles project. And if I hit the same button again, it goes away. So if you want a shell to pop up really quickly to run a command, then that's a nice way to do that. I mean, sure, you could have a separate workspace for shells, but oftentimes I find that I want to really quickly pop to a shell to run a command for some purpose, and that is a nice way to do that. I think there's probably a vterm, let's see, Emacs vterm toggle. Because since vterm is technically the best real terminal emulator, yeah, vterm toggle, here's one. I would say you're either coming down to eShell Toggle or vterm toggle for this type of functionality. I haven't used this one before, but I'm imagining it's the same kind of thing where you basically have a key binding that will cause vterm to appear, and then you can use it temporarily and then make it go away. So that's something you could try for that. So let's pull up .emacslisp. I may already have this here. No, not in this one. I'm just gonna pull up dotfiles.el, and I'll paste this code in, and I format this buffer somehow. Anybody know the right command for formatting a whole buffer of Emacslisp? Let's see. Indent buffer. Is that it? All right, let's use parent for indent buffer. Oh, come on, man. Let's do that. Oh. Yeah, Higman Schmidt, you can definitely use Control-C single quote to edit. I mean, maybe that's a way to do it, but I kind of wanted to have it in an actual Emacslisp file. Let's stick with this for now. Is parent for actually working in this buffer? I mean, come on. I don't know why it's not pulling in the indentation. It's kind of annoying. So parent for is a package that basically makes it so that you can do Emacslisp based on indentation rather than on balancing S expressions. But it doesn't want to work for me right now, apparently, to format the whole buffer and make it indented the correct way. All right, so that's probably good enough. I don't like this indentation, but we'll live with it. All right, so we're defining a minor mode here. Let's see if there's anything else I changed since the last time we did this in a video. So I think I've got a couple of hooks that I added, define some custom variables for things. So yeah, that's good enough. So let's just go on with trying to do the, oh, if you're in evil visual mode and press equal. Yeah. So let's go. Did that just work? Yeah, maybe it worked. That's great if it did. Cool, thanks Jonathan G. So, all right, we're gonna try to define this minor mode. So, if you don't know what a minor mode is in Emacs, basically it's a way to add additional functionality to Emacs that can be either active globally in Emacs or in a particular buffer. So to contrast that from a major mode is basically the main mode of a buffer that basically says how the buffer should be treated. So if you're in a programming mode like Emacslisp or TypeScript or JavaScript or whatever, there's going to be a major mode that controls how like the syntax highlighting is done in the buffer or the sort of the core functionality of the buffer. A minor mode is something that also applies to that buffer or maybe all buffers or everything in Emacs. And generally, you're probably going to use a minor mode for adding customizations for many things, unless you're trying to do like a main editing mode for Emacs. So we're setting up a minor mode for our .files mode so that we can set up hooks for org mode and be able to automatically tangle our .files or org.files file anytime that it changes. Let's see. Yeah, Jeff Bowman says mark whole buffer and indent region. Yeah, that probably would have worked. Let me undo this and try that. So let me just mark the whole buffer and then indent region. Excellent. Wait, excuse me. Did that work? Yeah, I think that worked too. Okay, so both good options. Appreciate it. So for a minor mode, one of the things you have to decide is whether it needs to be global or local. In our case, it's going to be global because we want this behavior to show up everywhere, basically. I mean, technically speaking, it could show up only in org mode buffers, but we don't want the user to have to automatically, or to have to set their own hook for org mode buffers to run this. It'd be better if they could just turn on dotfiles mode, and it would automatically do the right thing for any org mode buffer that gets used for dotfiles. So we're making that a global mode. We're also saying that it's turned off by default. We don't want it to be turned on by default. The user should be the one to decide that that happens. And this is what this init value parameter is for. Basically to say if it's nil, it's off by default. If it's t, it's on by default. The lighter is interesting because that dictates what shows up in the mode line. If I were to disable minions mode, which I used to hide all of these let me try this. Hide all of the minor modes here. This is a list of all the active minor modes right now in Emacs, and also in this buffer. So these strings are called lighters, and they are basically the way you identify that the minor mode is active, and you can click on them to get like a menu for those modes. In many cases, I think, or maybe is it right click or left click? Yeah, left click. So I hide those by default, so I don't really care too much about what the lighter is called, but since some people don't hide them, I'm putting it as dotfiles here. It could also be dot or something shorter. I'll turn back on minions mode so that that's not there anymore. And also the key map. So one really useful feature of minor modes is that you can define a key map for that minor mode, and then someone can go and change that key map if they want to change the key bindings that are on by default for your minor mode. And they can also set a, well, this key map is probably not a, well, we'll talk about that in detail another time. I don't think we're going to deal with key maps right now. Whenever I do the actual video on this, I'll have a little bit more to say about the key map. The last thing in the minor mode definition is the body, so that basically the code that gets executed whenever the minor mode is run. Let me actually add this here. So we're going to say dotfiles mode. So what we're going to do is just write out whether the mode is active or not whenever I evaluate this. So I've created a minor mode now, and if I type in dotfiles mode and press enter, it says we're live. Oh, I didn't add a format string for that. Let me add that too. And I'll go and reevaluate that minor mode. Yeah, so I turned it off and I turned it back on. So now we're able to toggle the minor mode. And this define minor mode function is actually a macro. And what it does is a lot of things under the covers, where basically it defines the function dotfiles mode, which toggles the state of the minor mode. Also defines a variable called dotfiles mode, which says true or false, depending, or true or nil, depending on whether the mode is on or off. And it will also define the key map, set up all the extra logic for defining the minor mode, everything else that you need it to do. So it's a very easy and convenient way to create a minor mode. And I would say that if you are trying to do any customization of Emacs outside of just your own config, definitely try writing a minor mode, because it's pretty useful, I think, and a nice way to encapsulate common functionality in Emacs. So what we want to do here is when dotfiles mode is turned on, we want to attach a hook to after save hook to check to see if the buffer is an org mode buffer, or actually we don't even need to do that. We can just check to see if it's one of the files that is from the dotfiles folder, one of the org files that's from the dotfiles folder. So we can do some logic here for that. And I haven't tried to write any of this, so I'm doing this completely off the top of my head. I might make stupid mistakes, so let me know in the chat if you see anything that looks obviously wrong. So I will say if dotfiles mode. We'll just define some local functions for this. So we'll say dotfiles remove hooks, and then if dotfiles mode, wait, that's on. We want to add hooks. So I think that yeah, it should be set to true before this code runs. So I'll say if dotfiles mode add hooks, and then otherwise we want to remove the hooks. Dotfiles remove hooks, and then we want to close that. Oh. Let's do that too. And I also want to add those functions here. So defun dotfiles add hooks, and then defun dotfiles remove hooks. Let's change that code too. And I'll evaluate that. I'll also evaluate this. I mean, it's not really going to do anything at the moment. Okay, so if I were to toggle dotfiles mode again, it would call those functions, but they currently don't do anything. All right, so now what I want to do is add a hook for after save hook, and I need to have a function that can handle that. So dotfiles after save handler. Let's see, file saved. Okay, so we're just basically writing a function that can be used as a handler for the hook. Add hook after file save hook. I believe that's what it's called. Let's check the value on that. Control HV. After save hook. After save hook. It's not after file save hook. Okay, and we're gonna use the dotfiles after save handler. All right, and then we're gonna do the same thing for the other function where we're gonna remove the same hook. I believe that's the right function for that. Remove hook. Hook and function, and whether it's local or not. So we don't need to say that the hook is local because we're doing a global minor mode. However, if we were doing a local minor mode where it is only for each buffer, then we would definitely want to set that up as a buffer local hook. You can do that with the third parameter to add hook. All right, so let me add or evaluate this code. Chen asks, is the dotfiles -- a convention, or is it something significant in the syntax? Great question. So typically in package development, what you'll see is that internal functions of a package, use multiple hyphens to, let's see, thank you, Matthew. Typically, they use 2 hyphens between the first word or the sort of the package name in the function definition name and the rest of it, so that it indicates that it's an internal function that someone shouldn't call that, a user shouldn't call that function. There's no way to make a function private inside of a package in Emacslisp, as far as I know. So this is kind of the convention that's used to discourage people from calling it directly. If I were to have only 1 hyphen, then it sort of indicates that it's fair game for someone else to call. But since this is all sort of internal stuff, we're sort of advertising that it's not meant to be called directly by someone. All right, so now let's check out whether that works or not. So we can check after save hook to see what's currently in it. And we see that it's currently fly check, get gutter, and WS butler. So we don't have our stuff in there currently. But if I were to toggle this, I'll turn it off and turn it back on. And if I check after save handler, if I evaluated everything correctly. After save hook. Yeah, it's not there. So someone said in line 30, Thomas says line 30, I have a typo of some sort. Thank you. Yeah. All right, so let me just reevaluate these functions because maybe it's not all set up right yet. Oh, no, not that part. Okay, so dotfiles mode, and then we will try after save hook again. Okay, it doesn't seem to be there, which is interesting. Let me write a message. And I will evaluate this one more time. And then I will run, let's just do this, dotfiles mode T. And we didn't see a message for that. Oh, adding hooks. Okay, so it said that, but let's see if it actually did it. It's very slow. Oh, okay. So I think part of the problem is that this is a buffer local hook. So is there a global after save? No. Hi, Combative Gaming. So Matthew says, sorry if you mentioned it, but any particular reason why that minor mode instead of file local variables plus org block header arguments? Because I'm trying to make it so that people don't have to do things in their org file if they don't need to mark this as a .files file. I mean, maybe it's something they could do, but the whole idea in this package is that you're supposed to have a .files folder with a set of org files that you automatically want to be tangled and then managed as .files. So not only will it tangle them, it would also create the symbolic links, excuse me, appropriately, and do some other things that are necessary to manage those. So so having someone add something to their org file by default would not be a good user experience in my opinion, but I'm certainly open to feedback on that. So yeah, it seems we have to do this as a per buffer hook. So we may need to have a different function entirely, which is hooking onto org mode. So here's what we can do. Dotfiles, org mode handler. I don't know if handler is the right naming convention to use for that, but that's what we can do. So I will try this. And now what we need to do is use that sort of buffer local parameter on add hook. We want to say depth, which is, yeah, we'll say nil for that because we don't really care about depth. I think it just means where in the list it gets added. And then also whether it's local or not, or buffer local. So what we'll do is nil and t. Marco says better to use GNU Stow for link handling. That's what I use right now, but I think it would be better if Emacs was able to do that for you so you don't have to think about it. You don't have to have a separate program installed to do that. Hey, Ashish. All right, so I'm gonna, let's see, org mode on. Let's call it that. Org mode on and org mode off, which is kind of a little bit unfortunate, but let's go with that for now. So we're gonna say on this one, org mode hook, and we will leave that part off, and we're also going to say org mode on. Is this right? Maybe it doesn't matter in the end because we don't care about it like removing the hook in the end. I think we only care about it adding the hook at the beginning when the buffer is org mode. So we'll do this. So org mode hook. Okay, so now let's just evaluate that function. Add hooks will do org mode hook, and then remove hooks will do remove it. All right, so I'll just copy this line and update it, and maybe this time I won't have a typo. All right, so now let's evaluate the add hooks function, evaluate the remove hooks function, and then I think we already evaluated this. We have after save handler. This calls the same thing still. I'll reevaluate that. Probably doesn't need to happen. So let's say dotfiles mode t, and now let's check org mode hook and see if our dotfiles org mode hook got added. Man, that's so slow. Probably has to pull up all the docs for that package or something. Okay, so dotfiles org mode hook now did get added, which is great. Okay, so anytime a new org mode buffer gets opened, then what's going to happen is we're going to add our after save hook to that to call the after save handler. So let's say I were to open up my desktop file. So fdd. Thomas asks, why do I keep jumping to the end of forms? Yes, I should be using Control Meta X, but it's just like a force of habit for me. So thanks for reminding me. All right, so now we should be able to see that this file has the hook set up. So I'm gonna just edit the file and save it. Whoops, save it. Okay, so it says function definition is void .files after save handler. Why is that the case? Because I'm pretty sure I defined that, but maybe I didn't. So Control Meta X. All right, so that's evaluated now. Let's go back and try to save this file again. Okay, file saved, great. So now I can add my functionality into this function, and I believe I have a function for that already, which is, let's see, .files tangle org files. So I'm not checking the path of that already, but I can. Yeah, Jonathan, that's what I just did. I basically on add hook here, the fourth parameter, I set the T to make it buffer local. So let's see. I want to call that here. Instead of saying file saved, I'm going to, whoops, I'm just going to call .files tangle org file, and I'm going to give it the path of the current file. I believe that is current, is it a variable? Current file. Let's see, is it buffer file? buffer file name. Okay, that's the one. Buffer file name. So buffer file name. But we don't want to tangle every single buffer. And also, yeah, don't worry about it, Jonathan. It's no big deal. Also, I already have functionality for auto-tangling my own config. I need to turn that off. So let's see. Auto-tangle on save. So I need to remove that hook. Osloy says, how hard it would be to make the buffers in the current tab show first when switching buffers. I'm not sure. You would definitely need something to, well, I guess you have to have a definition for what the buffers in the current tab are, which is not easy because you have to track which files were opened or which buffers were created while you're in that tab. So you have to do some background hooks basically to check on that. So yeah, it's possible, but it would take some work, I think. So org mode hook, I need to remove, oh, great. I did this hook as a Lambda in my own configuration, so it's not very easy to remove it. So I may not be able to do that. I wonder if I could do it manually somehow. Let's see. Org mode hook. Now let's just do some surgery on my config right now. So I'm gonna basically just go into this variable and I'm gonna pull this whole list of stuff. And this is buffer local too, isn't it? I need to take out the org mode hook. Yeah, okay, this is not buffer local. Cool, so I just need to take out this Lambda basically. And what I'm gonna do for that is I'm just gonna evaluate the whole expression. So if I go into, let's say, scratch buffer, is this fundamental or Emacslisp mode? Emacslisp mode. All right, so I've got some notes here for myself, but I'm gonna go back to that. So set queue, this is probably gonna be a bit of a pain, but let's try it anyway. So I'm gonna take those out and I will use all these. And we'll see how bad this fails. I'm sure somebody is grimacing right now at the way that I'm editing this file, but that's okay. All right, so I'm gonna set this. Work tempo setup. Oh, I have to make it a list first. So probably what I just did to edit all of those is not even relevant anymore, but let's try it anyway. I don't remember how to do the vertical editing at the moment. Maybe I can just do that. Bam. All right, that's good. I'll indent all of these. All right, so now let's try to run that. Okay, we'll see if this breaks anything. It might break something. I'm also very interested to see how bad people are howling at me now. Matthew says, if you didn't know, you can quote your next input with Control Q. Very nice. Okay, so now that I've done that, maybe in future openings of desktop.org, I'll kill that, and I'll open it again with my, whoops, wrong one, with my key binding. And now if I check the after save hook, come on. Great, it doesn't have that. Oh, no, it does have it. Anyway, whatever. We'll continue with it as it is because I don't want to waste any more of your time trying to fix what I did to my own configuration. So, so now we can run org dotfiles tangle org file. We'll just put a little message here so that we know. So dotfiles tangling. I'll do that. And now I think in this desktop.org, if I save it, it should give me that message now. So if I save this, yeah, I did see it, and I also saw something else fail at the same time. Or dotfiles tangle org file function definition is void. Apparently I never eval this whole buffer. Okay, so now I did that, and I should be able to save this file. Okay, dotfiles tangling, and it's gonna take forever because this file actually is quite large. Okay, so if we look at the messages buffer, I think we'll see the message, yeah, dotfiles tangling, and then writing everything out. Great. Okay, so at least we have that. Now, anytime an org mode buffer opens, when you save it, it will automatically tangle it. However, we don't want that to be the default behavior. We actually want to make sure that the file is inside of the .files path. I think I can steal some code from, no, maybe it's the Emacs from scratch config that has that. Emacs.org. I think it's tangle. Yeah, okay, I'll use this little bit here. And I'll put it in this part. Wait, no, that's the wrong file. So we want to go into dotfiles.el. Buffer switching is slow whenever you are tangling your .files as part of switching buffers. I need to do that asynchronously, but I have not done it in my own configuration yet. So we're going to dotfiles.el, and we're going to go down to, oh no, we're actually going to go in this function for the after save handler, and then we're going to clean this up a little bit. Move this message inside, move these two inside, and then I think, let's see, when string equal file name directory, buffer file name, let's just double check that. Okay, this gives me the buffer file name. And then we don't want user Emacs directory. What we want here is the .files folder. So what this is doing is basically checking to see if the directory of the current buffer, the directory of the file of the current buffer is inside of the same folder path as we have configured for the .files folder. So let me check that this, yeah, this is nil in this file, but maybe it will be true in the desktop.org file. So I'll try to edit this and save it. Okay, so I didn't see the message, and I think that's probably because I need to do some extra processing on free reference. Is that, oh, that actually happened just now. Let me write out a little bit more messages so we can see this happening. So let's put some more dashes in here just so it's more obvious that we're doing this. And also we can put a message in after it's done. This is my style of debugging, where I basically just write print statements. So hopefully it makes some of you feel better that I'm lazy. But the next Emacslisp video is going to be about debugging, so maybe we'll figure out a better way to do all this. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into this file. I'm going to edit it and save it. And let's go check the messages buffer and see if it actually wrote out the output. Yeah, so it hasn't written out the output, which tells me that that I think that we're comparing the path that was given by the user that's not fully resolved. So I think we need to resolve that path. So right now, by default, Matthew says message master race. Yeah, I think this is just the most expedient way to do things sometimes. Just print messages out. All right, so in the tangle function, I need to write something out to make sure that the .files folder is correct. Yes, Andreas also is in agreement. I think the experienced programmers are all in agreement that just writing messages is just a faster way to do it. And debugging is great whenever some things go really wrong, but you know. All right, .files folder. Let's just write that out and see what it says, because I'm pretty sure it's, well, yeah, I know what it is. Because right now we're setting it to default as home./ but we're doing a string equals. So I think we need to expand this. Oh, we are expanding it. What the hell? Okay, that should be right. Interesting. Well, let's write this out anyway. Ugh, I don't want to have to do that, but I'm going to do it. Oh, yeah. And until you start debugging select term and friends where you break even further than the mini buffer. Yeah, that's... yeah, doing development of a mini buffer function is probably a nightmare. All right, so... Osloy says they find that debuggers are great when explaining code execution to someone new to coding. Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because you can see it step through everything as it goes, and it's good for illuminating that whole process. What time is it? Tomas says I can just meta !eval a call to. Oh yeah, no, that's a great point actually, Tomas. Let's do that instead. That will be easier than what I'm doing right now. Okay, so we were writing some things out just to see what we have. All right, great. So I'm gonna go to desktop.org. I'm gonna take Tomas' recommendation, .files -- Was it after save handler? All right, so I did see something written out just then. Let's go to messages. Dot files tangling. No changes need to be saved. That's interesting. No changes need to be saved. Why does that even say that? Unless tangle doesn't save unless there was a change to the file. So let me actually change the file and run that again. I think it's tangling because it's locking me up. Yes, it just tangled. So, okay, it seems to work correctly. I think the hook is not hooking the right function somehow. Dre asks, as a general question, what is the most Emacs used or better Emacs used for performance, GUI or terminal? I don't know that it matters which interface you use for performance. I think that they both are sort of bound by the runtime characteristics of Emacslisp interpretation. So I think probably it's not going to make a huge difference. Now maybe you could say that dealing with font locking and setting font faces and whatnot adds extra overhead to the moment-to-moment operation of Emacs. That could be the case, but I don't know if it makes a huge Pratik has got some interesting messages in the chat. I'm sure he's trying to hack us right now. But yeah, I don't think that it makes a huge enough difference to matter. But you should definitely try terminal Emacs to see if it helps. All right, so let's go back and let's try to save this buffer one more time and see if the output actually gets written as we expect it to, because I don't think it is. Messages. Okay, it may actually be working right. Okay, so that's fine. It's tangling the dot files the way we expect it to. Yeah, it could be a cat walking on their keyboard. and now there's more messages coming, so we'll see what's going on. Pratik, if you are there, if you're watching, your keyboard it has a life of its own now. All right, so wait, did we actually see that? So I think I may have to mute Pratik. Let's see if I can do that. All right. So, sorry for the delay there. Let's see. I think that what I did see in the messages is that we wrote out this first line, but we didn't write the rest of them for some reason, which is interesting. So this function must not have evaluated the true somehow. And I'm not sure why. Because in that context, it should be running inside of the buffer. And when we run it manually, it works. So if we run it manually, then it seems that everything prints out the right way, and it runs the tangle operation. But I can't tell the difference because of the fact that my own tangle function is running and I can't turn it off right now without restarting Emacs. So let me jump back here. I know this is probably really boring. I might not try this again. I might have to be a little bit more prepared the next time, but I just thought it might be interesting to kind of like hack through something live. But yeah, it's not as interesting watching me do this as it is me doing something that I've already prepared and know exactly what I'm going to do next. All right. So let's just assume it works. So what we're going to do next. Chen, I am printing the values I'm trying to compare. I didn't print it correctly there. Let me just do that because that's not a bad suggestion. Let me just do this. I'm going to print this. I'm going to put this here and I'll reevaluate this function. And then we'll go back to desktop.org and change something and then save it. And then go look at messages again and look at the stuff we printed out. Oh, you know what? There is one difference, and that is that one of the paths has a slash at the end and the other does not, and they're not equal because of that. So let's see, is there a way to trim a specific character off of the end of a string? Maybe there's a library that can do that. Let's see. Let's look for a function called string trim right. Okay, good. You can use a regular expression. That's nice. And this is part of subr X, which is part of Emacs, which is good. When did that get added to Emacs? I wonder how long ago that was. Probably a long time, so maybe it's in modern, excuse me, modern Emacs. So signature, let's see. Haven't I used this somewhere in my config before? I probably did. Let's see. Trim right. No, I haven't used it in my config. Okay, so let me jump back to dotfiles.el. And here I'm going to use a let expression here to save this. So expanded path. And then I'm going to use file name directory. Which one is it that actually is wrong? Yes, it's this one. No. I think both of them need to be treated that way. Okay, so let's expand it. Let's see. Dot path. Let's go with some crappy names for now, and then we'll fix them later. So dot path, file path, and we're gonna do the same thing on both of these. I may need to have a helper function for this because I don't want to write the same regex twice. And so dot path, file path. I'm grabbing both of these, inserting them here. Now, let's see, defun dotfiles, normalize path, normalize directory, dir path. So now what we want to do is use a string trim right, dir path, and then we're going to use ///. No. Yeah, let's see if that works. I think that should work. And that's the only thing we really care about in that case. So if I were to run this, let me copy this whole thing. I'm going to use meta : to pull up the eval at the bottom. And I'll say dir /. Okay, so it takes it off there. But I also do want to make sure I'm pulling this from the end of the string. So let me put a $sign at the end of that too. And I'll try it here as well and see if that does work. Because sometimes Emacs regex syntax is a little bit different. Okay, it did work. And then if I don't put a slash at the end, it should leave it the same way. Okay, cool. So that should work for that. So let's add this extra little bit here to say, I mean, I guess we could do it all in line, but it just makes it a little bit more nasty. Let's try that. Let's just do it in line. Dot files normalize directory. Yeah, this is too much, but that's the way it goes. Let's just try it. And let me get rid of this pane because it's taking up too much space. Whoa. Let's make this smaller. Oh, yeah. Tomas says the right trim should ensure it's being trimmed from the end. That's a good point. I probably don't need to use the $sign at all in that case. Okay. Let me go back to where I was typing here. Dot files. Normalize directory. All right, so both of those are there. Let me get rid of all this stuff and make sure that we're still balanced, which we should be. So dotfiles normalize directory, that one and this one. And then we're writing out everything. And then we can take this out of here, reevaluate this function, reevaluate this function. Oops. Okay, let's see. What else are we saying here in the chat? Tomas says you can have something like a with current buffer. Ah, yes, that's a great point. That's a great point. Let's try that actually. That would make things a lot easier. With current buffer, I believe, was it get buffer? Is that what you can do? Get buffer? Get buffer. And .files.org, is that going to work? Sorry, desktop.org. Let me run this. Okay, that worked. Okay, so with current buffer, and then I can just run the .files after save handler on that. Boom. That worked. Great. Thanks to Tomas. That was a great suggestion. Okay. So I think that shows that our new check is working because we saw the .files tangling being written out there, and it did do the tangle process. .files tangling, tangle done. Actually, it didn't. Why is that coming out as a string? Is it because that's returning the string from the function? Interesting. Let me change that. Okay, so it is working after all. I think if I go back to messages, I'll see that the tangle worked. Yeah, okay, that's great. Everything worked as expected. What else are we saying here in the chat? Yep, okay. All right, so dotfiles.el. So now we're basically what we've gotten to at this point. Directory file name. Is that right? Chen says that I can skip this by using directory file name on the whole path to get that. Let's actually see. Change the org buffer within the with current buffer by appending some space at the end of the buffer. Ah, yeah, you could do that. I'll skip that part for right now. Okay, so what we'll try here instead is to use the suggestion was, where was it? Now I'm lost. Directory file name. Directory file name for this purpose. So let's look at the documentation for that to see what it says. Returns a file name of the directory named directory. This is the name of the file that holds the data for directory. Operation exists because a directory is also a file, but its name as a directory is different than the name as a file. Unix syntax, this function just removes the final slash. I wonder what this does on Windows, but let's just assume for now that that this works fine for Windows as well. And we can actually pull this up and double check that it gives us the right value. Okay, yeah, that seems like it's a good suggestion. So I don't really even need this whole normalized directory thing anymore. I could just use directory file name, which is really funny because we have directory file name and then file name directory. I mean, like, how many times can we permute the words in that function and come up with other functionality that is unrelated? Directory file name. Thanks for that suggestion, Chen. That was great. All right. All right, so I think that's good for that part for now. So what else would we want to do for this while we still have some time right now? We're almost at 2 hours, so I'll probably cut this off in a moment. But so the goal here was to make sure that we could tangle only files in the org mode buffers. Now, what happens if you turn off dotfiles mode? You would kind of want it to unhook everything from the buffers that have been hooked, but we need to go and find those, which is a little bit ridiculous. So, you know what we could do is we could actually just, put a hook in here that says when dotfiles mode. That would be one easy way to solve this problem, so we don't have to worry about. Yeah, I'm doing this the wrong way. Don't yell at me. We wouldn't have to worry about whether the mode was on or off. We could just check to see if the mode was active before doing this. So that would be one way to solve this problem. But there's probably another way to do this where you can just get rid of all of the buffer hooks all of the registrations for a particular hook in buffer local hooks for a particular hook function. Maybe that's a way to do it. Okay. So to get back to all this, I guess the point was we turned on the miner mode, and then we have this logic that will add the hook to do this auto tangling anytime a file gets saved or an org file gets saved. So now we have that capability. The next thing that we would want to do is have extra functionality after the tangle that goes through and finds all of the files that will be tangled out, and then could manage the symbolic links for them. So let's say that you added a new section in your org file that writes out a new configuration file. You would need to not only tangle that file out into your .files folder, but you would need to create a symbolic link to the real location where that file belongs. We're not going to do that right now, but that's something that we'll do in another video or another stream, maybe. So I don't know. This wasn't really that helpful from the perspective of showing how a miner mode would be written. So when we actually do the miner mode video, I'm going to do some more stuff aside from just this. But for those of you who are here now, you got a sneak peek into the future video contents. All right, anybody else got any other interesting questions that you would like to have answered before we go off today? Osloy says there's 6 permutations for 3 elements. Yeah, let's see if we can invent some more functions that use those same 3 words and come up with unique functionality for each of them. That would be a little bit ridiculous. Yeah, actually, it was better that the people were here to give me suggestions because I was doing really dumb things, and people were able to save me from total humiliation by giving good suggestions. All right. So hopefully the discussion today was useful and interesting for you, and hopefully the clickbait title wasn't too disappointing. I hope that I encouraged you at least to consider contributing to Emacs if you have the ability to do so, because I think it's really important for the future of Emacs to for all of us to be contributing to it, not just in package code inside of the core of Emacs, but literally the low-level code in Emacs. So I think that's a really important thing to consider if you love Emacs, like I do. So definitely let me know what you think about these streams. I've done 2 of these so far. I mean, I'm so impressed that so many of you have stuck around while the stream has been going on, because I've been just rambling a lot. But if this has been fun and useful to you, definitely let me know either in the chat or in the comments afterward. If you're actually watching the recording of this stream and got to this far, let me know in the comments, because I'd be very surprised if people are actually watching the entire recording. I'm trying to figure out whether the recordings of these live streams are actually useful as standalone videos, because after the last stream, I kind of realized it probably doesn't make good content for me to try to record videos inside of the stream and then pull it out as a separate video. So if these stream recordings are useful for whatever we do in them, then that might be cool just to leave the recordings up so that you can see them later. Yeah, so I think that's everything for today. So the plan right now for videos is that next week I'm going to cover debugging Emacslisp, because I think it's kind of important to do that now as a next thing to go into. I might do another video next week on some other topic. I haven't decided what it would be yet. I'm still planning to post that Emacs performance startup performance video at some point. That could be next week too. So if you already watched the live stream from last Friday, you'll be seeing the same content again, unfortunately. And then after that, we'll figure out what else we're going to do in future weeks. But for now, we're going to stick with doing this format for the Friday streams to see how people like it, and we'll keep going with that. So give any suggestions you have on what you would like to see in the Friday streams, and I'll see what I can do. Dre says, System Crafters is the best way to end your week and hang out on Fridays. Well, it's fun for me. I like it. I think it's pretty fun to be able to chat with all of you and do some fun stuff. Silly Dragon, I absolutely do accept video suggestions, so leave them as comments or on the join the Discord and leave them there too. It'd be great. Oh, how much latency do you see, Tomas? Because I'm curious about that. I don't know exactly what my latency setup currently is in OBS. It should be pretty short, but maybe it's about 5 seconds or so. All right. Lastly, before I go, I just want to say thank you to my sponsors. There's a few of you here today, so I appreciate you all being here. But these people have decided to sponsor the content I make about Emacs and other topics, and I'm very grateful to all of them for deciding to do this. It's inspiring to me, and honestly, it's like one of the main things that keeps me going making these videos, but just knowing that people care enough about what I'm doing to actually become a sponsor. So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, definitely check out the 2 links in the description below. I'm on both GitHub sponsors and Patreon. I also have a link to PayPal if you want to do one-time donations. And yeah, I think that's all for next time. For this time. Next time, we don't know what's going to happen then yet. Video on making a major mode would be nice. Yes, we're going to do that for sure. It may not be next, but it'll be in the future. Trip says, leave the recordings up. It's free, right? Yeah, definitely. I'll leave the recordings up. I just don't know how useful the recordings are of a 2-hour-long live stream, but yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. And I hope all of you have a great weekend and maybe have some time to hack on your Emacs configs. And until next time, as always, happy hacking. See ya.